Okay, today I'm going to begin the process of recreating this ring. And this ring is made from one size of half-round wire, and this is 14 karat yellow gold with a gel chrysoprase. We're going to be recreating that using sterling silver wire, half round. I'm going to draw this down to a smaller size. And the stone I've chosen for this is a chrysoprase round that I cut. So let me begin by annealing this wire. It's been previously drawn down and is hard now, so we'll need to soften that a little bit so we can draw it down to a smaller size. I'm eventually going to want to get that to a width of approximately, let's see here, yeah, about 1.5 millimeters, maybe a little less, 1.4 millimeter, just in width. So let's start the process of annealing that. And copper tongs for grabbing it. Then I have borax powder and denatured alcohol. Let's go ahead and flux that piece up good. And keep my borax mixture pretty thick, so just a little alcohol in the borax. You can see when I pull my piece out of it, it's got a nice heavy coating of borax on it. Always be sure to close this up and get it out of the way before you fire anything up. Alcohol fires are pretty nasty and they're really hot. And the best way to keep your heat where you want it is to set up some sort of a little brick kiln here, which works great for retaining the heat. And I'm going to use my little Miko N midget, and I'm going to use it without a tip on it. Makes a nice bushy flame that way. I have the number 6 tip, but it's a little less bushy. Propane's on, the oxygen's on. Fire that up. And let's add just a little bit of oxygen here to it. And let's talk about our torch flame. If I were to open the oxygen up quite a bit, you can hear it hissing really hard. That's called an oxidizing flame, and it's really oxygen rich. Well, it's really hot as well, so it's great if you're just trying to heat something up and you're not worried about oxidizing any of your metals. If you start to turn your oxygen down, it becomes less of a hiss and becomes what we call a neutral flame. So it's burning about as much oxygen as it is fuel. So it's what we call neutral. Now if you continue to reduce the oxygen, you begin to get what we call a reducing flame. And you can see the yellow tip inside of that flame is unburned fuel. Well, that unburned fuel will tend to burn oxygen out of the air. And what that does is reduces the amount of oxygen getting near your piece and reduces the amount of oxides. The trade-off is it's not very hot, so it can take you a little bit longer to actually heat your piece up. For this particular amount of metal and the thickness of it, I'm going to leave the fuel about where it's at, and I'm going to turn this down just a little bit. I'm going to open up a little bit more of the oxygen, and I'm going to lean a little bit towards the reducing side. So just a little bit of unburned fuel actually coming out there. And that'll probably do it right about there. So we'll go for a reducing flame, but not a strong reducing flame. It still has some heat, but it has some unburned fuel in there as well. And if you can keep your piece covered in flame, then the air can't get to it and actually start oxidizing, because once the metal becomes hot, it tends to oxidize with oxygen from the air. So let's see, my oxygen is lightening up a little bit there, so I'll run that back and add a little more oxygen to get closer to a neutral flame. Now we can see that our piece is starting to become nice and kind of a dull red. We don't want to overheat it, we don't want to underheat it either. I'm going to lift it up and get a little bit on the underside there. And now you can see it's starting to relax. It's actually fully annealed now. And we'll just lock that annealing in place by quenching it. Okay, I'm going to go through the pickling process, then I'm going to go through the drawing process and actually draw this down. I'll probably have to do it a couple of times to get it down to the size we want, but I'll come back when I get that drawn down to the size we're going to be working with. Okay, I actually ended up annealing this 4 times and drawing it down several times. I had to stop at about, I believe, right at about 2.3 millimeters. That was the smallest half-round hole size I had on my drawing plate. So we'll be working with 2.3 millimeter wide. And for thickness, it is a dome height of about 1.25 millimeter. So we can go ahead and flatten that out. I've already annealed it, so it's nice and soft, ready to go. Okay, that'll be ready to go. And now we need to draw out some dimensions for the size of the elements that we're going to need. And everything starts from the stone, so let's begin with the stone. And that stone looks like it's about 11.8 millimeters, so we'll put that in here. 11.8 millimeters for the stone. And we're going to need a bezel. We're going to be using 26 gauge, which is about, I believe, 0.2 or 0.3. Let me drag out some bezel material here. Let's just get the actual measurement. And I believe I'll be using 26 gauge for this. It's a rather soft stone. So let's check the width on that. It's actually too small for those, so let's drag out the digital calipers and let's see what it has to say. Yeah, it looks like 0.52 millimeters, so we'll call it 0.5. So for the outside dimension on the bezel shown here, we're going from 11.8 up a millimeter, so it'll be 12.8 on the outside. And that will need to be the inside dimension of the outer ring. And those dimensions are here. We're not going to be doing a prong set as in this ring. I'm actually going to be bezel setting this stone. So we're going to need the bezel to actually sit inside of this halo, this ring that goes along the outside. So 12.8 will need to be the inside dimension of our outer ring. So let's get busy making those elements. We can begin with the bezel, and let's go ahead and start with that. To determine the bezel height, let's take a look at the stone here. You look at the profile of it, and it's got just a little bit of bend starting at the bottom, so it's not exactly straight-sided, so we can actually make our bezel fairly low, and I believe we'll go with that. That's right about 2.2 millimeters, so we'll leave it we'll go a little bit taller, leave us some room to trim that bezel up. I'll go up to probably 2.6 millimeter, and I've got a nice flat edge here, and we're going to need a piece not terribly long. There we go, 1, 2, 3. So we're actually looking at that area there. Let me get my trimmers out here. Right in the right position. We'll go just a little bit outside the line. You always want to leave your line in place. Once your line disappears, you don't know where you're at. So the line is your reference point. You always want to keep your reference point handy. And I'm going to stop right about, maybe just a little bit past where I actually measured out 3 diameters of that. Remember, pi is just a little bit bigger than that, so we'll add a little bit for the amount above pi. There we go. Close enough, and that should break right out of there. Bend it back and forth. Alright, that's good. So that's our bezel material. We can go ahead and put our metal back in storage here. Put that away. Put the rest of the tools away. And now I've wound up with a bezel material that might have a little bit of curve to it this way. It's definitely got some shape to it this way because of the shearing action. And don't know if you've ever rolled out dough before, but I've got a roller here, and that's what I use to help flatten my my bezels out. And if it's a little bit tall like this, I can just push it down with my finger and then use the bezel. And I can see that it's got a little bit of curve. Yeah, just a little bit of curve going this way, actually. So I actually want to grow this edge a little bit so that the whole thing tends to turn back the other way. It'll put this side in compression, which will put this side in tension. So let's roll it over here closer to the edge, and I'm going to push down on my roller so that I'm actually pushing more on this hand and then applying more force to this side of the bezel. So let's start there, and I will begin to straighten that curve out a little bit. And there wasn't much curve there, so it really did not take much, and we are exactly square now. So both sides are parallel, and it looks like it's in great shape. Let's leave that there. We're done with rolling. Let's grab out our mandrel and see if we can go that small. I think we're going to need to go, yeah, we're at 12.2 on the end here, so we can actually use our mandrel to actually form the bezel, which is easy enough to do. I'll get this out of the way, and I'll go ahead and put my mandrel through here, and we'll just start here, and we'll start with the bending process. Alright, that's pretty close. Let's take a look here. I think I'm going to need to go with a little smaller mandrel to actually get that to overbend a little bit. So let's try that. I actually have some various size rods and different things for forming things like this. So let's try. The only thing about that is you need something that you can actually slide it off of the end of when you're done with it. So if we lay this mandrel here on the back of the stone, we can see that it overbends it probably by 20% or so. This is actually a bezel setting punch, but we're going to repurpose it as a mandrel, and we'll just start bending it around and just forming it like so. And that gets us to a fairly round shape. Now we've overbent it, so it's a little bit below that. Now we can go back to our larger mandrel, and we just want to be right on the end. So I'm just going to slip it so it slips over to the end there. And we'll put it back through the hole here. And now we can persuade it to actually take that shape. So roll this around and it'll take any high spots out. And we're pretty close. So just a little bit oversized, perfect. We can actually mark that up and get a nice round shape out of it. Working in a small area here, it really helps if you keep your area clean. I like a clean work area, so I don't like to have a lot of tools here. So you see me getting tools out and putting them away quite frequently. When I'm done with a tool, I put it away. So let's go with this. I'm going to switch over so I've got some magnification. This is a little small for me. So hang my glasses up here on the wall and we'll go with some magnification. And I need a scribe. So we'll go with the scribe here. Need a little light, and we'll actually put this in place here, roll it around, kind of push it together, and I will actually mark right where I think I need to cut that at. Alright, let's go with that. And this will actually use a pair of straight shears, and I'll come in so that the line is on the cuts, on the cut side. I can see the line when I cut, and again I'm going to leave the line there. Alright, done there. Let's grab some pliers. The shears always tend to bend things up a little bit, so we'll actually put these pliers in. They're half round on one side, flat on the other, and we'll just kind of persuade that metal to get back into shape there. Since these are not parallel pliers, you need to really do both sides to get both sides of the metal to actually start playing nice. And pliers go back, through with the scribe. Now let's check our fit here. And yeah, it looks like we're about a millimeter or two shorter, so we're going to sneak up on the line. And let's try this. Let's mark it again. We've gotten a little closer. There's not a lot there. And again, we'll clip that a little bit. You always want to try to clip it square. In this case, I'm going to clip right on the line. We're getting really close. And I think the rest, anything else we need to take up, we can probably do with the file. So again, let's clean that edge up just a little bit. Persuade it back into shape here. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's try that. And can I actually close those ends together? Yes, I can. So we're really close. I don't mind being a little bit undersized at this point, because if the bezel is a little bit too small, I can actually put it over my roller again and actually roll it, and it'll actually grow. Because if you know with dough, if you were to lay out a strip of dough and you wanted to make it longer, you would just roll along it and it would get a little bit wider, but it would mostly get longer. I treat metal a lot like dough. It's got a lot of the same properties as far as its plasticity goes. So let's square the ends up here so they meet squarely. Bench pen's always handy for this. You don't want to be doing air filing. No air filing on the bench. In other words, holding it up here, trying to do this. Always ground your piece and ground your hand against something solid. And of course, this is a matter of being able to file the metal without filing your fingernails. So that's always a trick to get your fingernails out of the way and still accomplish what you're looking for. Okay, those ends are really square now. So we're in good shape. Let's do one more check on the stone. Let's bring it around here, bring it in nice and tight. And yeah, it's going to be just a little bit undersized, so I'll be able to sneak up on that with the roller when I'm after I've soldered it together. So let's set our stone aside for a moment. And I'm actually going to overbend this a little bit so these ends come together. I just pass them back and forth over each other on each side so that we start to get a bend and start to sneak up on it a little bit. And what we want to wind up with is something that kind of puts itself under tension, just like so. And then if you need to, just move those ends around until they line up well. You want to make sure they're lined up on this way, and that looks good. Alright, let's bring in the soldering station at this point. And set that up. I'm actually going to use the soldering station in this way. And we're going to be using hard solder. This is sterling silver, so not too worried about melting it. If I was to use fine silver, I might go with a medium solder, or preferably not an easy solder, because we do have some operations after this. We're actually using hard solder. Let me grab hard solder. Just talking and not thinking. There's a couple of nice size pallions of hard solder. And dip those in alcohol, tease them onto the joint there. Don't like those standing on top of each other. They both need to be laying flat across the joint. So, take some time to position them just so. And now we're ready to go. Okay, let's try this again. Always try to put something in your non-torch hand. It's just a good habit to have something, a tool, implement, anything, or put your hand down. It's not uncommon for you to want to grab something, and if you grab something in torch operation, it's probably going to be hot and you'll wind up getting burned. So always try to put something in your offhand. In this case, I've got a solder pick, a titanium solder pick. That's usually what I put in my offhand. And I'm going to go with a little bit of a bushy flame here. I want a little bit of a reducing flame. I do not want to use an oxidizing flame in this case. So a little bit long, we got just a little bit of yellow showing in just the tip of that, and just out here on the end, let me get that that light out of the way. Just out here on the end, I'm just trying to lightly heat this whole piece, and you want to kind of try to avoid bubbling really quick and having the pallions of solder go flying everywhere. And as it starts to take on some heat, you can start moving in with the torch a little bit. And there, my solder is flowing now. It's puddled, and there we go. Got up to a nice bright orange color, so I feel pretty confident that it flowed down into the joint without flowing all the way through and then covering the outside face of it. That'll make for an easy cleanup later. Let's just take a look and see what we've got. Yeah, that looks like a good joint. Looks good on the inside, so let's drop that in the pickle. And I've got I use a sulfuric acid pickle, and I keep it as far as practically possible away from all of my tools and everything else. It's on the outermost reaches of my my tool chest over here, and so basically as far away from all of my metal tools as I can keep it. And it also has a plastic lid on it, so I keep that lid on there. And if it starts to boil, which it does a couple of times a day, I'll just reach over and turn it off for a few minutes, and then it cools down pretty quick. All right, we are done with our soldering station, so let's go ahead and put the soldering station away. Excuse me, I got a little cough today. A little agua. Okay. That hot pickle does a pretty quick job of getting the flux off of there. Let's take a look and see how we're doing. Fresh dip in some water. Grab my cloth here and dry it up. And let's take a look and see. Yeah, now I've got a little bit of flux left on the inside over here, little glassy spots. But if I look at the joint, I can see that a little bit of solder came through and got onto this surface, so I know that the joint is actually joined and filled. Let's put it back in the pickle for just a few minutes. Now at this point, we know what our outside dimension of that bezel is going to be. It's going to be 12.8 millimeters. So I'm going to look to make a ring to hold that bezel that's going to be 12.8 millimeters inside diameter, not outside. The 12.8 is the outside diameter of the bezel, so that would need to be the inside diameter of the ring that's actually going to hold that bezel. So let's measure up on on the mandrel here and see where 12.8 comes out to. Let me set my calipers to right at 12.8. There we go. And if we come down here, it looks like it's about 1 3/8 is what I'm showing on my ring mandrel. So we'll go with 1 3/8 for our ring. Set that aside. Move our bench pin out of the way. And we'll start with a little bit smaller. I'm actually going to start way down here on the end. And we can kind of sneak up on that size that we were looking for. I'm going to go down on the inside so it crosses just a little bit. Now, to persuade that bitter end that's hanging out there down onto the mandrel, use my nylon faced hammer here, give it a few persuading taps, and we'll actually roll it up here. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's set that aside for a moment. Our piece that's in the pickle should be about ready. Let's have another look. See if we got all of our flux off of it. And yeah, looks good. Okay, now we need to actually make this the right size. So a couple things you can do here. If you don't have a roller, you can actually form it on the end of your ring mandrel, force it on there, and actually make it the right size. In this case, I'm going to try my roller. See if it'll fit on the end of that. And it does not fit that roll anyway. It doesn't fit that one either. It does, however, fit this one. So let's go with this one. And it's wide enough I can actually get a couple of fingers on there, so I'm trying to actually keep it level as I roll. I don't want to push one harder on one side or other, then I'll wind up with a bezel that winds up with a big twist in it. So let's try this. You can actually use your palms. And that's pretty good. That's got a nice round shape to it. It's still a little bit large. It's standing up on one side. So let's see if we're large enough now to actually slip up onto the end of the mandrel. Not quite, but I do want to do one quick operation. I've got a little bump of solder on the inside here. So let me grab my small half-round file. We'll lay it up here and we will take that bump down. I don't usually file the outside of the bezel until it's actually been soldered in place. If you do, you could wind up with a starved joint where the solder remelts and actually is drawn out of that gap. Of course, we use hard solder to prevent that, but sometimes you overheat your piece and it can actually cause that hard solder to reflow, and that can wind up being an issue as well. So a little cleanup here usually doesn't take much, and I don't mind if a little bit of solder is left in that particular area. That way, if it does reflow, there's some solder left there to actually fill in the joint. And I believe we're about there. Let's give it another couple of rolls here. Don't know if you can see that or not. I'll move that light over a little bit, give you a better idea here. And try to push evenly on both sides. And this is actually stretching the bezel and making it a larger circle. Let's try it again. And we're getting close. I can actually push it down on the stone now, so we're getting closer. And as I recall, it was going to be just about the size of the end of our mandrel here. So let's try persuading this down onto the mandrel. And for this operation, I'm actually going to hold it here. And I'm going to use a chasing hammer because I like that nice wide face. I've got it about halfway down now. Let's take it off, flip it over, position it again, and stretch both sides evenly. Roll it around here and see where I'm at. There we go. It's really close. So pop that off. And let's see how we're doing. There we go. And we probably got maybe a 1/4 millimeter or so difference on that. So there you go. You can see that the stone is actually fitting really nicely in there now. And there's a little bit of give there, so if this was to become misshapen a little bit during the next operations, it shouldn't affect it so much that I can't actually get the stone to fit down in there.